Well, it's kind of spooky music. I was thinking it sounded like it could be Western, and then, when the drums kick in. But, welcome in everyone. Congrats on getting first Darthborn. Congrats on getting second Crimson. So I'm going to be reading ghost stories tonight. Admittedly, they are... Well, the book is called Great Ghost Stories of the Old West. So it's Old West stories. I'm not sure how scary they'll be, but you never know. And I hope everyone has had a good week so far. It is only Thursday, so... Oh well, I'm not drinking coffee for once. I'm drinking chocolate tea. It's a weird thought, but it's tea with chocolate nibs in it, so it makes it chocolate tea. Even if it doesn't taste chocolatey. But yeah. I don't have the other scene cover on my touchpad yet, so I have to do it this way. And I have to figure out how to get the cats on the screen. So let's see, you can hear the fire. Let's say I actually animated the fire and other things. But Shiva? Oh, that can be worked into a pun. Yeah, I was trying to get him with the pun saying "se siete," because that's 6-7. Doing pretty good. Had a bit of an off day yesterday, but today's gotten better. And Guilty, coming in third from Japan. Saw the tattoo. Looks good. I would say, if you go to a bookstore and find a book on Japanese folklore, that would be a good one to have. As those I've got, which one do I have? I just got a copy of one of them. And it's not my closest bookshelf yet. Yeah, we are doing ghost stories. Oh, please look. It's not that there's any bookstores there or anything. So let's see, how many stories does this have? This one has 8 stories and an introduction. Oh, that's not too bad. And a lot of these came from the old magazine series Strange Stories. Well, Strange Tales. So most of them should be out of copyright. The rest... Oh, that doesn't mean. Let's say I can translate things. I mean, that's what good scanners are for. Now learning how to pronounce them, that's entirely a different subject. There's another one that you can't see behind the book. Let's see if I can fix that. Well, I see the eyes occasionally. But there's one that moves along behind the ground behind it, then up a tree. I'd say all you'll see is its eyes. So. Yeah, it was fun making the ghosts in the background. But I've had this background that I made. Oh, I think I did it for Halloween Stories, my second year of streaming. I mean, it's in my channel preview, but that wasn't made. Well, no, that was made my second year. This Dusk of Midnight the Chibi, and it's in there too. Eh. I could really try to do the animation better. I just used Adobe Image Ready to make it. Which I need to finish getting that installed on my old computer because I'm planning on doing more work on it. Well, but anyway, as the book cover says, Great Ghost Stories of the Old West. And of course it does a minor introduction. The Western Writers of America is an organization of professional authors whose aims are to promote their common interests, encourage the writing of better quality westerns, and bring them more effectively to the attention of the reading public. The contributors in this volume are all members of the Western Writers of America. Introduction. Ghostly history is as old as man's. Ghosts gathered in the shadows of prehistoric caves, walked drafty halls in ancient castles, and creaked the stairs of the colony homes. Whenever man has journeyed, ghosts have followed. They crossed the Bering Strait with the ancestors of the Indians. They whisked across the Atlantic with their Jamestown settlers. And when the Americans packed their Congressa wagons and headed west, ghosts moved with them. But the land west of the Mississippi River was unlike land that had ever been seen by man or ghost. The lonely windswept prairies led on forever. Strange desert plants took human forms in the midnight, and mesas rose like forbidden islands in seas of tinted sand, endlessly changing with the movement of the sun and cloud. Water-carved rocks took weird shapes. Gigantic mountains blocked the trails, which cliffs and wooden canyons that moaned with the wind. If ever a land was created for haunting, it was the American West. It was also a harsh land, one that made its own rules. Men who could live happily by them were mavericks, individuals as strange and varied as the landscape itself. Small wonder that the ghosts were mavericks too. No clanking dungeon chains or wafting through dusty corridors for western ghosts. Occasionally one took refuge in a bell tower of a ruined Spanish mission, or parade ground of a deserted army fort. Few buildings, however, are haunted in the West. The Indians destroyed their homes rather than risk a haunting, but it probably wasn't necessary. Whole mining towns have been left for the specters, but few spooks walked so-called ghost towns. As a general rule, Western ghosts, like men they followed, preferred the rugged outdoors. Ghosts gathered around the campfires of the mountain men, joining ancient Indian spirits and those brought by the Spanish conquistadors. Cowboy ghosts followed spectral trail herds, riding phantom stallions. Ghosts prowled abandoned mines and guarded forgotten treasure. There are even haunted railroads, though it's been many years since anyone has reported a ghost upon the tracks. Passenger trains are too few and diesel engines too swift. Besides, ghosts don't care to mix with those superhighways, neon lights, and glass-sided skyscrapers and jet planes. Ghosts need drafty homes, deep shadows, and country quiet enough for the wind to be heard. Yep, positioned that way. They can't compete with TV sets and transistor radios. The big creaky houses they loved are disappearing, and so are the ghosts. But in the desert, the wind-swept mesas and canyons of the west, a few phantoms still linger. A lonely campfire will draw them to hear their stories retold. A solitary camp is giving way to camping trailers, crowded national parks and motels. Highways invade the remotest sections of the West, and the ghosts retreat. Before they disappear forever, the Western writers of America have tracked down some of the most famous of the Western ghosts. In their stories, one can trace the history of the American West and the men who tamed it. They were adventurers, tough and impulsive, doggedly challenging the hardships of rugged terrain they called home. There were many men like Kennedy and the Trap, solitary mavericks who found in the plains and canyons of the American West a refuge from the world of men and the rules of society. It is not surprising that Kennedy's eerie, inexplicable story involves him in a mystical conspiracy with the strange and ruthless land he has chosen. New Mexico and the Spanish heritage in which so much Western history is rooted come to life in the ghost wolf of Thunder Mountain and Back Before the Moon. In different ways, the suspenseful tales reveal an exotic supernatural world that Spanish frontiersmen found in the mesas of the West. The Hexer gives glimpses into the domestic life of early settlers. It tells of the great influx of families who left their homes in the East to seek a better life in the unexplored territory of the Mississippi River. First, they answered the call of gold in California. Later, they discovered rich soil of the valleys and swamps. These men were not the mavericks, the loners. They brought their families and began to carve a community and a civilization out of the wilderness. The ghostly events surrounding the Hexer in this story have a totally different impact than those of the other tales. Perhaps the most essential and least often explored character in the drama of the American West is the American Indian. The Strange Valley is a mind-twisting tale about three young Sioux Indians. In the middle of the narration, the story makes a shocking about-face, jolting the reader's sense of time and place. This arbitrary leap may correspond to the change experienced by the Indians of the West. Suddenly, strange white settlers began seizing their territory, transforming it to suit new and mysterious uses, and leaving them disinherited in their own country. Past ghosts and present realities become strangely confused in this mystifying story. The two remaining legends have a robust spirit of the frontier adventurer, and Johnny Who Rode the Ghost Train. Young Johnny is a gold seeker, that stubborn breed of American who flocks to California in the hopes of striking it rich. Chola, in The White Riders, is an old-time cowboy, most famous of the Western heroes. Their uncanny experiences derive from the classic and classic and terrifying moment of being stranded, completely alone and without water, in the immense deserts of the West. The mysterious adventures that await these two men embody the romance and suspense of the frontier. In this volume, American ghosts are once again brought to life, reminding the modern reader of the otherworldly magic that continues to pervade the American plains, a magic which is old as the West itself. Eddie Baker. I don't think you can poke a Kate. Well, you could. Hopefully with consent. Anyway. Our first story for the night. The Strange Valley by T. V. Olson. The three horsemen came up on the brow of a hill, and the valley was below them. It was a broad cup filled by the brooding thickness of a prairie night. The light shed by a narrow sickle of a moon peeked out just another Dakota valley, about a mile across as the white men reckoned distance, and surrounded by a rim of timeless trees. The valley floor was covered by an ordinary growth of small yew oaks, a lot of brush, and some sandy flats with a sparse lacing of buffalo grass. The young elk said, "Is this what you wish to see, Blue Goose?" He made no effort to keep his skepticism from his voice. "Yes," said the rider at herself, "this is the place." "Now that we're here, tell us again what you saw the other night." The shaman's son sounded very intent. "Where did it come from?" "From there." Blue Goose leaned forward as he pointed toward the eastern end of the valley. "As I told you, it had a long day of hunting, and I was very tired. I made camp in the center of the valley and fell asleep at once. This was about sunset. It was long dark when I woke. I came awake all at once, and I don't know why. I heard a strange sound, a kind of growl that was very low and steady, and it was a long way off, but it was running very fast in my direction, and I sat in my blanket and waited." The young elk said with a grim smile, "Because you're too afraid to run?" Blue Goose was silent for a moment. "Yes," he said honestly, "I was afraid. I didn't know what the thing was, but I knew it was getting closer, and getting louder after a while, as if it were in great pain or anger. Then I saw it. It was a huge beast as big as a small hill, black as the night, and running very close to the ground. Its two eyes were yellow and glaring. It went past me very close, but so fast I didn't think it saw me. It was bellowing as loud as 100 buffaloes, as if they bellowed all at once. And suddenly it was gone." "What do you mean, it was gone?" young elk demanded. "You said that before." "I'm not sure. All I know is that suddenly I saw it no more, and heard it no more." "I wish you could tell us more about it," said the shaman's son, "but I suppose it was very dark." "Yes," Blue Goose agreed, "even a little darker than tonight." He hesitated. "I thought that the thing might be covered with scales, bright scales like a huge fish, since the moon glinted here and there, but I couldn't be sure." "You're sure you're not very sure of anything?" young elk jibed. Blue Goose sighed. "I do not know what I saw, as I have said. I left the valley very fast and camped a long way off that night, but I came back in the morning and looked for the thing's spoor. I looked all over, and there was nothing. But I found where I'd camped, and my pony's tracks and my own. But the thing left no sign at all." "Because there never was such a thing. You should be more careful about what you eat, my friend." And Oak spoke soberly, though he felt like laughing out loud. Spoiled meat in one's belly is like the moiwakin, a strong drink. It has a bad effect on the head. For a little while the three young Sioux sat with their ponies in silence, looking down into the dark stillness of the valley. A silky wind pressed up from the valley floor, and the warm from the summer night, and full of ripening smell of late summer. But something in it felt a faint chill, and that was strange. Young Elk felt a crawl of gooseflesh on his bare shoulders, and he thought, "The night is turning cold. That is all." He felt a nervous tremor run through his mount. He laid his hand on his pony's shoulder and spoke quietly to the animal. He was angry at Blue Goose, his best friend, for telling such a foolish story, and angered himself at coming along tonight because of the two others, and he was deeply curious. And back in their camp, only a few miles to the north, there was a firelight and laughter and a warm-eyed girl named Morning Teal. And young Elk was a fool to be out here with his friend, and with the son of the shaman, son of the tired old faker, the medicine man. Of late, young Elk thought sorely. There had been more than the usual quota of wild stories of visions and bad spirits running rampant among the people. Early this late summer, on the river of greasy grass that the whites called Little Bighorn, the long-haired General Custer had gone down to defeat and death with his troops. Many warriors of their own band had been among the 12,000 Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho that had helped with the annihilation of the hated enemy. In the uneasy week since, as the people followed the buffalo, hunting and drawing meat in the prospect of being driven back to the reservation by white cavalry, a rash of weird happenings were reported. Men who had died were seen walking the prairie with bloody arrows protruding from them. Voices of the dead were heard in the night wind. It was the shaman's part to encourage that sort of nonsense. Men claimed to be a blue-coat soldier who had scalped appeared him nightly, with the head still fresh on his head. The shaman chanted gibberish and told him to bury the scalp so that the ghost would trouble his nights no more. Young Elk was disgusted. He had never even seen one of these spirits. Only the fools who believed in such things ever saw them. The shaman's son broke the long pause, speaking quietly. "This valley is a strange place. Today I spoke with my father and told him what Blue Goose told us. He said that he knows of this place, and that his father's fathers knew of it too. Many strange things happened here in the old days. The men, known to be long dead, would be seen walking, not as spirits, but in the flesh. Still other things were seen, things too strange to be spoken of. Finally, all of our people of the Lakotas came to shun the valley, but that was long ago, and most or even the oldest ones have forgotten the stories." Young Elk made a rude chuckling sound with his teeth and tongue. "Young Elk does not believe in these things," the shaman son observed. "Why then did he come with us tonight?" "Because otherwise the next noon I would hear nothing from you and Blue Goose but mad stories about what you saw tonight, and I'd prefer to see it for myself." "Oh," said Blue Goose, "then there was something. I did not make a great story out of the air." "Maybe not," young Elk said shyly. "Maybe it was a white man's iron horse that Blue Goose saw." "Well, now you jest with me, even though I am not at all wise like young Elk. Still I know that an iron horse of the Wakuskans runs on two shining rails, and there are no rails here, and the iron horse does not growl thus, nor does it have two eyes that flame in the dark." Another silence stretched among the three youths as they sat on their ponies on the crest of the hill and peered down into the dark valley. And young Elk thought angrily, what is this? They had come here to go down in the valley and wait in the night in hopes of that thing Blue Goose had seen make another appearance. Yet they continue to sit here as though of winter and the spirit has descended and frozen them to the spot. Young Elk gave a rough laugh. "Come on!" He kneed his pony forward, down the long grassy dip of the hill. The others followed. Near the bottom, young Elk's pony turned suddenly skittish, and he had to fight the shying animal to bring him under control. Blue Goose and the shaman's son were having trouble with their mounts too. This is a bad omen, panted the shaman's son. Maybe we had better go back. No, young Elk said angrily, for his pony's behavior and strange feeling of this place was putting an edge on his temper. We've come this far, and now we'll see what there is to see, if anything. Where was Blue Goose when he thought that he saw the beast? Blue Goose said, We must go that way, and forcing his horse, though a heavy tangle of chokebush bush, he led the way very quickly, though afraid as his nerve would not hold out much longer. They came to a rather open stretch of sand flats that caught the pale glimmer of moonlight, and it studded with clumps of thicket and a few scrub oaks. Here's the place, Rivers told them. The three Sioux settled down to wait. Nobody suggested that it would be more comfortable to dismount. Somehow it seemed better to remain on their ponies and accept a cramp or two. It was only young Elk told himself that they should be ready for anything, and they might have sudden need of the ponies. Once more it was the shaman's son who ended an interval of silence. What time of the night did it happen, Blue Goose? I can't be sure, but close to this time, I think. Silence again. The ponies shuffled nervously. The wind hustled through some dead bush, which rattled like dry, hollow bird bones. Oddly, young Elk slipped his throw-axe from his belt and toyed with it. He slid his hand over the familiar shape of the front head and the fresh thongs of green rawhide that lashed it to its new handle. He had only put together this morning. His palm felt moist, and his head was slightly dizzy. Now the shapes of rocks and black masses of brush seemed to shimmer and swim. The landscape seemed misty and unreal, as if it were through a veil of fog, and yet there was no fog. This is a trick of the moon, young Elk thought, and he gripped his axe tighter. His knuckles began to ache. There, Woodley's whispered. Do you hear it? Young Elk snapped. I hear the wind. But even as the words formed on his lips, the sound was increasing. Unmistakably not the wind. Not even a gale wind roaring through the treetops of a great forest made such a noise, and yet he could see nothing. But he knew that the sound was moving in their direction. Suddenly, the two yellow eyes of which Blue Goose had spoken came boring out of the night. Now he could see the hulking black shape of the monster running towards them at an incredible speed, and so low to the ground that its legs could not be seen. All the while, a strange humming roar made itself steadily growing. The ponies were plunging and rearing with fear. The shaman's son gave a cry of pure panic and achieved enough control over his mount to kick it into a run. In a moment, Blue Goose bolted after him. Young Elk fought his terrified pony and held the trembling animal steady. His fears swallowed in the eagerness to have a closer look at the thing. But he was not prepared for the fury of its rush as it bore down toward him, and its round, glaring eyes blinded him. He could see nothing beyond them. It let out a piercing, horrible shriek as it neared him. It was hardly the length of 3 ponies away, and it seemed to hesitate. It hissed at him, long, gushing hiss, while the yellow eyes bathed him in their wicked glare. Young Elk waited no longer. He plunged his pony in an angling run that carried him past the thing's blunt snout, and in that moment brought his arm back and flung his axe with all his strength. He heard it make a strange hollow boom, although he did not see it hit, and then he was racing on through the brush, straining low to his pony's withers, heedless of the tearing branches. Young Elk did not slow down until he reached the end of the valley. Then he looked back without stopping. There was no sign of the beast. The valley was deserted and quiet under the dim moonlight. Young Elk crossed the rim of the hills and caught up with his friends on the prairie beyond. Did you see it? The shaman's son demanded eagerly. No, its eyes blinded me, but I hit it with my axe. Young Elk paused. His heart was pounding so fiercely in his chest he was afraid they would hear it, and so quickly he went on. I heard the axe hit the thing. So it is not a ghost. How do you know? Countered the shaman's son. Where did it go? Did you see it? No, young elk said bitterly. It was very fast. Let's go back to camp, Blue Goose said. I don't care what that thing was. I don't want to think about it. Joe Kercheval had been dozing in his seat when his partner, Johnny Antelope, hit the brakes of the big truck and gave Joe a bad jolt. And then Joe nearly blew his stack when Johnny told him the reason he had slammed to the abrupt stop in the long, lonely highway in the middle of nowhere. I tell ya, I saw him, Johnny insisted as he started up again and drove on. A real old-time Sioux buck on a spotted pony. He was sitting with his nag right near the middle of the road, and I almost didn't stop in time. Then he came charging past the cab, and I saw him fling something. I think it was an axe at the truck. I heard it hit. You were just waking up just then. You must have heard it. I had a rock hit one of the wheels and somebody against the trailer, that's all, Joe said flatly. You've been on the road too long, kid. You ought to lay off a few weeks. Spend a little time with your relatives on the reservation. Johnny Antelope shook his head. I saw him, Joe. And then I didn't see him. I mean, I could swear he simply disappeared and vanished into thin air, just as he rode past the cab. Of course, it is pretty dark. Come off it. For a college-educated Indian, you get some pretty far-out notions. I've made this run 100 times, and I've never seen any wild redskins with axes, spooks, or for real. You white men don't know at all, Joe. It's Johnny-come-latelys. This has been our country for a long, long time. I can tell you some things. Johnny paused, squinting through the windshield as the racing ribbon of highway unfolding in the tunneling brightness of the headlights. I was just remembering. This is a stretch of land the Sioux have always shunned. There are all kinds of legends concerning it. I remember one story in particular my old granddaddy used to tell us. I guess he told it 100 times or more. Nuts to your granddaddy. Johnny Antelope smiled. Maybe you're right. At least old Blue Goose always did have quite an imagination. So does his grandson. Joe Kercheval cracked his knuckles. There's a turnoff up ahead, kid. Swing around there. For what, Joe? We're going to go back to see if that wild man on a horse. I'm going to preview all you've seen was moonshine. Joe paused and added brightly. Sometimes I think you got to prove it to yourself. I say it was just a rock that hit the truck, and I'll be losing sleep if I don't mind out for sure. Without another word, Johnny swung the big truck around and headed back to the highway. The two truckers went silent until Johnny slowed and brought the truck back to a shrieking stop. The air brakes were hissing, and he leaped from through the window and pointed. There's the spot, Joe. I recognize that twisted oak on the right. Okay, let's have a close look. I climbed out of the cab, and Johnny pointed to the exact spot where he had first seen the Indian warrior, and where the warrior had cut off the highway alongside the cab and thrown his axe. Look here, kid, Joe planned with a flashlight beam on his roadside. Soft shoulders. If your boy left the concrete right here, the horse would have tromped some mighty deep prints on the ground. Not a sign, see? Wait a minute, Johnny Antelope said. Flash that torch over here, Joe. He stopped and picked up something from the sandy shoulder. A halo of light touched the thing Johnny held in his outstretched hand. Know what this is, Joe? He asked softly. A Sioux throwing axe. Joe swallowed and started to snort. Nuts if it's not, it's an axe. But the words died on his lips. For under the flashlight beam, even as the two men watched, the wooden handle of the axe was dissolving into rotten punk, and the leather fastenings were turning cracked and brittle, crumbling away. Only the stone blade remained in Johnny's hand, as old and flinty and weathered as if it had lain there on the road for an untold number of years. That was interesting. Whose ghost story was it? His grandfather's or his own? That's kind of an interesting twist on the story. But I can definitely see that showing up in Strange Tales. Oh, the axe appearing and vanishing in his hand was really a cool thought. But anyway, carrying on. The next story for the night: The Phantom Mustang by S. Omar Barker. Wherever pounding hoofbeats drum, as galloping riders go or come, wherever the saddle is still a throne, and the dust of hoofs by wind is blown, wherever the horsemen, young and old, pace Mustang's tale is told. 100 years on hill and plain, with comet tail and flying mane, milk white, free and high of head, over the range his trail has led. Never a break at his pacing speed, never a trot nor low his need. Since faraway days of the wagon train, men have followed his trail in vain. A score of horses spurred to death, still he flees like a phantom's breath, and from some hill at horizon's hem snorts his challenge back at them. The bullet drops him dead by day, yet wide at night he speeds away, forever a thief of tamer speeds, stallion prince of the Mustang breeds, coveted prize of the men who ride, never a rope has touched his hide. Wherever a saddle is a throne, a great white Mustang's tale is known. A phantom ghost of heart's desire, lusty wind with soul and fire, milk white monarch, may you free, race the stars eternally. That's a nice little poem. The next story for tonight: The Trap by Clay Fisher. Kennedy felt the horse beginning to go rough beneath him. He had been expecting it. On this rocky going, no man could make it that long as he had already ridden out on coming in that day. "Easy, easy," he said to the laboring animal. "It's only a posse." The horse seemed to understand the tone of the words, for it slowed and went better and steadier for a ways. "We'll rest on the rise ahead," Kennedy said. "I can see a few miles, and you can catch some wind, and we'll go on. We'll make it." He knew they wouldn't. He knew it before they came to the rise, and he got down and walked over to the overhanging spur of the gray-black basalt that gave a view down the canyon behind them for 10 miles. It wasn't a canyon, really, but a narrowing valley. The canyon proper lay before them. Kennedy grinned and wiped his streaming face. It was hot, and getting hotter. "Pause," he said. "They're pushing. I mean to take us. I must know the country ahead. They don't like to ride if they're in any hurry." The horse, now, did respond with its ears and turning its soft eyes as it had before. It stood, head down, blowing as though of distended nostrils. Kennedy came back and squatted down and put his hand below the nose of the horse. There was moisture of pained breath that would strike his palm. "Damn," he said softly. "Blood." He got his field glasses from the saddle pocket and examined the pursuers through them. 8, he said aloud. 6 ropes. I wonder how come it is that they always fetch so many ropes. Never saw a posse yet that didn't feel the need to have one of them each. Never saw a posse yet that didn't feel that each of them ought to have a rope. His fingers went through his sunburned neck. He felt it tenderly, and he grinned again. "Son of a gun," he said. "It could happen." Kennedy's grins were not the only grimaces of a fool, but of a unfeeling man. They were the grins of a gambler, and of an outlaw, and a thief. Kennedy knew where he was and where he had been, most apparently where he was going. It did not frighten him. He would grin as they put the loop over his head. That was his kind. He wouldn't curse or revile, and he wouldn't pray. Not out loud, anyway. "Us," he said. "What do you think?" The animal, slightly recovered, moved its ears and whiskered it gruntingly. Kennedy nodded, turning his back to the approaching possum and glassy to the country head. "Me too," he said. "The grunt and the whisker is all we've got worth. We haven't got no place to go." He tensed as he said it, the glasses freezing in an opening and the rearing base rock of the closing valley. It was to the right. A good horse, fresh and sound, could take a man up that gap in the cliff. A spill of detritus and the old ages of the fan of boulders and stunted pine that lay below its lip would permit the perilous mountain passage. There was water up there, too, for Kennedy could see the white ribbon of stream splashing down in a rainbow falls to mist before the lower rocks in a spume of red and yellow and turquoise-green lights, splendid with the beauty of early sun. "I take it back," he said. "Maybe we do have a place to go. Pretty, too, and handy to town. You can't beat that." Directly ahead was a level sunlit flat, dotted with tall pines and scrub juniper and house-sized boulders. A clear stream from the high hole in the right side valley wall watered the flat, growing good mountain hay upon its sandy red loam, and making a ride across as a thing of pleasure to the hearts of many Western men. "Come on," said Kennedy to his horse. "You canter me along the flat, and I'll climb up the land afoot, leaving you to pack up nothing but a saddle and a grub sack. Game? Least we can do is make those birds scratch their breakfast, and who knows? Our luck might change. We might get up there into a hole in the wall before they come up to rise and hear and spot us. If we can do that, there's a chance they'll ride on by up the valley, and we can double back tonight and make it free." He was talking to Kennedy now, not to the horse. It was a way men much alone when they needed to do some figuring. They would do it out loud, the way Kennedy was doing. It sounded better that way, more convincing, and more as though it might really come off. Kennedy even swung into the saddle, believing his own advice and telling himself what he wanted to know, and then accepting it as a very good chance indeed. Again, it was his way. The man didn't live by the gun and a good fast horse without acquiring the working philosophy of works of elasticity and limit. "Move on," he repeated to the horse. "It's your part to get us across that flat in time." The little Mustang humped its back and shook itself like a wet dog. Running sweat and caked as well flew from its streaked sides. It gathered itself in response to the rider's words as a visible thing. The horse was like the man. It wouldn't quit short of a last second or step or shot. They were a kind of country around them. It was all the edge they had ever needed. Kennedy panted, wiped the perspiration from his eyes, and stared upward again. Behind him, the little horse came on, unled, and the leaps rained over the horse as to not trail and be stepped on. He followed the man like a dog, panting with him, struggling where he struggled, sliding where he slid, and lunging as he did, after each setback. They had made it nearly to the top of the fan of the fallen rock below, and leading into the opening of the side canyon. Another 4 or 5 minutes they would be clear of the climb. They would be off to the slide and safely into the notch in the high wall of the valley. They would be out of sight from the posse, and the posse still had not come into view of them on the rise back across the plain flat. "Easy, hoss," said Kennedy. "We're going to make it." Kennedy was wrong. 30 yards from the top, the Mustang put its slender long foreleg into a rock crevice and drew it back quickly. The movement set the sled moving and caught the leg and crushed it like a matchstick below the knee. When the horse had freed itself and was standing hunched and trembling behind Kennedy, the shattered leg hung sickeningly, its swing-like and free from the ground, and Kennedy cursed with tears in his eyes. It was not the luck of it that brought his angry words, but the shame of it. It was his pity and his feeling for a gallant companion that had given its all and almost found it through. The hesitation, the wait near the top of the sled, near the safety of the hole in the wall, it was a natural thing in the Western man. His horse was hurt, and it was hopelessly hurt. He would have to leave it, but not like that. Not standing there on three legs, hunched up like a metal pain and fright. Not standing there watching him with those liquid brown eyes. No, he couldn't leave his horse like that. But how else? He couldn't shoot the Mustang, for the noise would key the posse to his location. He had a knife, and he could cut its throat. Or he had an axe, and he could have crushed his skull above the eye socket and put the poor devil down painlessly. With a rock he might be able to stun the brave little brute, but he could not be sure of killing it cleanly. Same held true for the butt of his Colt, or the steel-shot heel of his Winchester. He could stun the horse, likely put it to its knees, but not still be able to go down knowing it would recover and not try to get up again and go on, and suffer as no horse riding needs an instant. Downside about old books. Pages seem to stick. So sufferers, no horse-riding man could think to let his mount suffer. But damn, this was his life and he was arguing with about. It wasn't the damn horse's life. If he didn't do something and do it quick, the posse would be over the rise and he and the horse would go to hell together. Well, he could use the Colt butt. He knew he could hit the exhausted animal hard enough to put it without the necessary time for himself to get onto the hole in the wall, and for the posse to ride up and on the valley. That was all the time he needed, or at least it was all he could ask for. He pulled the Colt and started back to the horse, sliding and stumbling in his hurry to get to the trembling beast and knock it down. But when he got up to its side, when he looked into those dark eyes, he couldn't do it. He had to be sure. "The hell with the posse," he said to the little horse, spun the Colt in the air and caught it by the handle and put it right behind the ragged ear and pulled the trigger. The smoke from the shot was still curling, and the little pony was still going down slowly, when the first of the pursuing riders came up over the rise across the flat and yelled excitedly back to his comrades that the game was in sight, and on foot. Kennedy went up the little stream behind it, where it fed rainbow falls leaping outward into the main valley. The possemen were just topping the Demetrius flat and closing in on the hole. Back there, Kennedy made a decision. It was not to stay and fight from the entrance cleft to the hole, where the little rivulet went out to the side canyon. He did not know what lay up on the side canyon, and feared he might be a way to get which the possemen, familiar with the territory, would ride a circle and come in behind him. He could not risk that, he believed. He must go up the creek as far as he could, hoping it would be far enough to find a place where he could put his back to the wall and fight without their being able to get behind him. Now, going along, the way was becoming steeper and narrower, the creek bank was little more than wide enough to pass a good horse and rider. He saw ahead of him a basalt dike, or cross dam of rock, which cut across the narrow floor of the side canyon. There was a stream with another plunge, and this was about 30 feet. Above the dike, Kennedy could see the boles of pine trees, and knew since the ground above they disliked, though fairly level, the cross-laying of the rock apparently served as a barrier against which the winter erosions of snow, ice, and thaw had worked into the spring floodings so the creek down to the soil, and built up a tiny flat. Kennedy's gray eyes lit up, his brown face relaxed, and he said aloud, "Ah, God, maybe this is it," and went on with renewed strength and some hope of keeping his life a little longer. Up there, above the rock cross-bank, a man with a good carbine and plenty of shells could hold down an 8-man posse for several afternoons. Well, 2 or 3 anyway. For one, for certain until nightfall. 12, 15 hours, say. It was better than nothing. His luck held. There was a good angling trail along the 30-foot vertical face of the rock, It was a game trail, and somewhat of a cow trail, too. He made out the droppings of elk, black-tailed deer, and steer ranges, then suddenly and strangely, a fairly fresh pile of horse sign. This latter had sent a chill through him. He was on his knees in an instant sighting. Then he straight grinned, grinning, and that was all right. The pony was unshod. Moreover, he suspected that the hard prints in the ground were left over had been shod was one of a bunch of broomtails, wild stallions, came into this rocky depth for water that flowed so green and cool in the stream. Clearing the top of the stone dam, Kennedy grinned wide. The flat above lay precisely as he had imagined it. He laughed softly, as a man will do when he's alone. Now then, it would be a little different from the place those hungry lawmen had passed it. It was perfect. At the apex of the triangle of the flat saw a thick stand of sycamore and cottonwood tree, aspen, laurel, and willow, and he knew that the water was headed there. A moment later he made out the source of the stream, a large artesian spring gushing from a native rock under the grand pressure. The spring was set above the grove some few feet, its stream falling rapidly to plunge into the foliage. Likely it cooled up under the trees, and probably down to Johnsburg. That's what lured the wild horses and the other game and the cattle, too. What few of the latter were hardly enough to come this far into the mountains for feed. All a man would need to know was hole up in these boulders that girded the spring, and there above the trees, and he could command his Winchester the whole of small and open flat plains of Spring Grove and the stone cross dam that Kennedy had just clambered up. Taking a deep breath, the fugitive started across the flats toward the spring and its hole-up boulders. It was not until he had climbed safely into his haven at the canyon head and laid down panting that he looked back at his trail, and there were already a few possemen, and he saw that they had come. Below him, in the trees, the spring pooled up exactly as he had expected it would. Also, the rim of the pool showed the sentries of wear from the hoofed animals coming to its bank for water. There was something else, two other things, that he had not expected to see there, and the grin faded, and his gray eyes grew taut and tired and empty. First thing was a wild horse. It had not gone up and out of the side canyon as Kennedy had hoped, showing him the way to follow its tracks and escape over the rim where no mounted man might follow. It was still in the grove of trees that sheltered the spring pool waterhole, and it wasn't still there because of its thirst. Beyond the trees, back where Kennedy had come from, and so skillfully blended and built into the natural cover of the canyon that even his range-wise eyes had missed them, there were two woven brush and pole wings of a second thing Kennedy had not dreamed to find there. Those were man-made wings of a mustang corral down there. Kennedy had stumbled into a horse trap, and was caught there now, with this unfortunate lone mustang that now cowered in the trees and could not get out of the trap any more than he could, and for the same reason, the posse and the Box Canyon. "Steady on," Kennedy called softly down to the terrified horse. "We'll think of something." 2 hours after high noon the sun had gone from the canyon, and Kennedy could see its light splashing the far side of the main valley still, but the canyon was soft-shade and hot. Kennedy drank enough water to keep himself from drying out, yet not enough to log him. He noted the wild mustang seemed to do the same. It knew, as Kennedy knew, to be ready for a fight or fly when an empty belly. "Smart," said Kennedy. "Smart as hell." The horse heard him and looked up. "Coo-ee, coo-ee," Kennedy called him reassuringly. "Don't fret, I figure something for us." But it was a lie, and he knew it was a lie. He had gone down right after the first layup on the spring boulders and saw the trap and the wild broomtail in it. He closed off the narrow gate with a funnel-winged corral with his lariat, as he had done that in a hurry before the posse had worked up to the canyon and taken its position on top of the cross dam. His one thought had been that the broomtail was a horse, wild or not, and so long as a man had a horse, he wasn't out of it in that country. And he waited to keep hidden from the posse and the fact that he did have a horse up there in the head timbers water. The mustang had played with him in the last part of it, lying up shy and quiet as a deer in the bushes and brush, not wanting any more of Kennedy, warned for men who knew where it was there. It, in this case, was a scrubby little stallion, probably too small and old to hold a band of admirers. A little horse had the fixtures of the temperament of a mongrel stud animal. Watching him lie still in the spring brush, his eyes following every move of the men below him, as well as the single man above him, Kennedy knew that he and the trapped horse were friends. This only problem was proving it to the horse. Sometimes these old scrub studs had been ridden long ago and would remember a man's smell and voice. He tried dozens of times to talk to the Mustang up towards his end of the spring pool, but the animal gave no sign that his sense and sound mankind was familiar with him or welcome. He bared his teeth silently and pinned his ears and squatted on his haunches ready to kick like a pack mule in the morning. He did this every time Kennedy said more than 3 or 4 words to him, or accompanied his talk with any movement that he might mean that he was coming to see the horse, if the horse would not come up to see him. What possible good the horse could do him, even if by some miracle Kennedy might gentle him down and put his saddle and bridle on him, Kennedy didn't know. Then, even when he was thinking that far, he laughed and shrugged. Saddle and bridle were down there on that rock below the hole in the wall, and he'd had no time or reason to take them off his dead mount. So if he went out there and tied the broomtail, it would be bareback, and that was about as good as bad as the old crafty stallion would sprout wings and fly up out of the canyon. The bridle, of sorts, he could rig from splitting and unraveling short length of his lariat. It would be sort of breakage hackmore arrangement, and might have to do more simple directions of right and left and well up. But even if he rigged the Sioux headstall and got it on the shaggy little horse, then what? That was, even if the rascal wanted to be good, or had been ridden in the past, and remembered it all of a sudden, nothing. Not a damn thing. Kennedy couldn't ride out of that canyon if he had the best saddle mount in Montana waiting and eager to make him try. It was all crazy, thinking of that wild stud. But just finding any horse up there was bound to start a man's mind going, especially when he had just shot his own mount and was fixing to put his back on the best rock he could find and go down head flying. But it was crazy all the same. All Kennedy could do was to go up the old broomtail stud could do, bite the rope in the last breath till he had him, then kill himself, if he could, before the others did it for him. The afternoon wore on. The heat in the deep-walled little canyon was enormous. Deerflies swarmed up the shining pool and bit like mad cats. They nearly drove Kennedy wild, but he fought them with his hand and minded the swats his neck back. And when evening came, they lifted up out of the canyon on the first stir of the night wind. In the early part of the waiting there began some desultory talk between the posse and Kennedy. Talk of Kennedy coming out peacefully or getting a fair trial, but the fugitive had not bothered to take that offer seriously. He knew that the trial was he would get. The posse had its own witnesses with it. They would bring up these 2 or 3 men who said, seen the shooting, and say to them, "Is that him?" And the men would say, "Yes, that's him." And the trial would be over. The witnesses, like Kennedy, God, how he hated them. It wasn't that he minded being identified if he was the man. It's his business. No feeling was held against a witness who had seen something. It was those devils, like the ones in the posse, who had not seen the job, and yet were always ready to raise their right hands to be sworn, were the ones that Kennedy hated. There had been many witnesses that had passed between him and that teller. All the other bank people had been on the floor behind the cage, and there had been no customers in the bank or in front of it. The shooting had happened, and Kennedy had made it to his horse and back to the bank, and made it some way down the alley into the sagebrush south of town, before he had passed a living soul. Then it was 2 farm wagons, both carrying kids and driven by women, that he had ridden the mile well out of the Gray's Landing. How those good folks, and they were only the real witnesses, saw the cashier and the other teller in the bank for, how they could identify him as anything other than a horseman not of that area, Kennedy did not know. As for the 3 shots that had killed the teller, they must have killed him if the posse would not have pushed so hard. Those shots had been fired after both barrels of 36 Derringer and the teller brought up out of the cash drawer had been triggered and put 3 slugs, one in Kennedy's chest. And one in the ceiling of the Second National Bank of Gray's Landing, Montana. But the only witness to that fact was dead. Kennedy had reacted as all men with guns in their hands react to other men with guns in their hands. It had fired an instinct, pure conditioned reflex of long experience when that first 36 bullet went into the pectoral muscles of his left chest. Armed robbery? Certainly. 20 years in territorial prison? Of course. The man expected that. He had been run down like a mad dog and cornered and starved out and strung up on a naked cottonwood like a damned Indian drunk or a common horse thief. That was not right or fair. Murder? Could you call it murder? When the other man was a professional in his business and he could see that you were professional in yours. And you told him he would be killed if he tried anything funny. Then when on top of the fair warning, you gave the first shot? You could call it murder if he shot the answer in his head and tried killing you. Self-defense was actual verdict, but of course an armed robber could not plead self-defense. But he was not guilty of murder, or even assault with a deadly weapon, or even intent to commit murder. Of all the damn thing, really. But to sack that calf drawer and clear out the Gray's Landing as fast and as peaceably as he as an old horse could manage. Kennedy grinned, even as he extorted himself. It was no good. He knew it was no good. A man had to be honest with himself. If he was another business, he wouldn't have needed a gun to conduct his trade. Needing and using a gun, till he was always in peril being forced to use it, the teller was an honest man. Frank Kennedy was a crook. The teller was a dead honest man, and Kennedy a live dishonest man. Kennedy was a killer. "No," he yelled down at the posse. "I won't do it. I won't shot second. I didn't mean to harm the fellow. He pulled on me and shot first. He's dead, ain't he? Sure he is. And you say to me you come to down peaceful and you'll just get me a fair trial? With a dead teller back on the floor of the Second National? That's rich. Really rich." The posse men were startled. It had been 2 hours since the fugitive had made a sound. Previously he had refused to come down, and they had thought he meant it. Now, did they detect a change? Was it that he wanted to reconsider and was only protesting his ego by the defiance? You missed a dark pupper. Was it he wanted to reconsider and was only protecting his ego by the defiant outburst? What was that all about? "That's right, you heard us," the leader of the posse called up to him. "You come down here and we'll guarantee to take you back to Gray's Landing and get you either in Cheyenne or Miles City, wherever the court's sitting, by train and under armed guard. You'll get the trial we promised and the protection beforehand." He waited a significant moment, then demanded, "What'd you say? There's no use any more people getting hurt." Kennedy's gray eyes grew tighter again. "That's so," he called back. "It includes me, too. I don't want to see nobody get it else, either. Especially me. No thanks, Mr. Possum Man. I'll stay up here. I don't fancy what you brung all them ropes just to tie me up and ride me back to Gray's Landing." There was a silence from below the cross stand in the rock, in the upper throat of the canyon, that lasted perhaps 2 or 3 stretching minutes. Then the posse man called back. "All right," he said. "You'll have it your way. When it's full dark, we're going to come for you, and you know what that'll mean. There are 8 of us, all good shots, but you won't have a chance to rat a note bin. We've got bullseye lanterns on the boat to light you out. We get them up behind those boulders where you can't snipe them, and yet where they throw light up there around you, you might like a bright moonlight. We mean to stomp you out. There won't be no trial and no talk of a trial. You're dead right now." Kennedy sank behind his breastwork of basalt and gray-green granite. He hawked the company's spittle from his mouth and spat grimacing down towards the Mustang stud. The animal had been crouching and listened to the exchange of voices intelligently, like some big, gaunt, sandy-maned dog. Seeing him and noting his apparent interest, Kennedy managed to trace a slight grin. "Well, what do you say, amigo?" he said. The horse looked up at him. It was the first time after long hours that Kennedy had seen the jungle tribe talking to the animal, and he had made a direct and not spooked response to the voice. Now he stomped his blade and split rock before him, and whispered softly and grunted in his threats, precisely as Kennedy's old horse had done. "All right," said Kennedy, for some reason feeling mildly warned about the Mustang's action. "So I've reached one friend in the world. That isn't too bad. As long as you have a friend, you have a chance. Rest easy. Let me think. We'll still make it. You and me." It was dusk when the old steer came down the cliff. There was also a Ladino, one of those mossy-horned old rascals that had suddenly hidden out in the old gathers of a dozen years. He was old and crafty and cautious as any stray animal, but he had to have water, and he was coming down to the spring pool to get it. They certainly saw the men on the posse and winding their mounts, but they did not see him, and he knew that they did not. His yellow buckskin hide and the dark crews, or cross-stripes on his shoulders, and the dark brown legs and feet blended perfectly into the weathered face of the cliff, and he made no more sound coming down that hidden trail than a mountain doe might have made. But he had failed to see Kennedy, or at least separate his scents, or the scent of Mustang Stud, and the other horse and the man scenting from below. He came on carefully, silently, yet quickly down the wall of the canyon above the rim and above Kennedy. Seeing him, and suddenly lifted his head and heart. He had seen right in the first place. There was a trail up that blind box canyon at the side of the canyon. A track up the dizzy sheer cliff up there, that he could pass as a desperate man or a cat-like wild Mustang, but not a mounted man, or a man going afoot leading a tamed and saddled mount. Come on, he heard himself whispering to the old outlaw steer. "Come on down here and let me see how you do it. Let me see how and where you get off that damned wall and land down here where we are." He grinned when he said it. Then he said "we," meaning himself and the wild stud, without thinking about it. It was funny how a man can take anything for a friend when he had run out of real McCoy and was in his last corner. I suppose that if a sidewinder crawled up along that final minute, he would have had to talk to it. The man would find some excuse to think friendly of a snake tribe. Well, anyway, he was thinking with his deep kindness about the animal kingdom just then, especially the horse and the cow part of it, and especially about the latter half. "Come on, keep coming on, don't slip, for God's sake," he said to the giant gun steer. "Easy, easy, let me see you do it. Just don't fall and spook or get a bad smell and change your mind. That's it, easy, easy." He talked the steer down that cliff as though his life depended on it, and it did, and the steer made it. He made it in a way that caused Kennedy to suck in his breath and shake his head in wonderment. He made it in a way that even caused Kennedy to think for a moment about being there some other idea of divine providence, but it was the sort of thing no man could have figured out by himself. That weird, crazy, wonderful kind of last-second reprieve that no force of God Almighty could have sent a man in Kennedy's place. It was a miracle. The Don Steer performed it with an easy quickness that defied belief, too. He came to that place on his side of the canyon where it seemed to Kennedy that the trail must end. The man could see the sheer face of the rock dropping 60 feet in that crack bed. A giant outcropping of granite hid an exact end of the right side trail, but Kennedy could see it. And with absolute certainty the trail did not continue downward from that outcrop that hid its actual terminus. But as he watched the steer disappear behind the outcrop, and as he wondered what would happen next, saw the lean yellow body lurch itself in a graceful step from behind the outer ledge of the outcrop, and sail outward through the thin air of the canyon's drink throat. It appeared as though the leap would stash a worthy brute through the rearing face of the opposite end of the left-hand canyon, which lay no more than 15 or 20 feet from the right side wall. But the steer disappeared, this time seemingly into the very face of the opposing cliff. There was a tricky turn in that rock as it came inside, just at the point. However, and while Kennedy could see the creek's raggedy broken bottom, he could not see where the steer hit into the wall. He was sure for the moment that the animal had made his landing somewhere other than the creek bottom. Difficult as it might be to accept, the old outlaw steer had somehow made it from one side of the wall to the other. But even so, then what? Where was he now? The question was sooner answered when the missing steer appeared and walked right out of the waterfall that came down the Kennedy's elevated vantage to strike into the begin following the brief section of creek down to the pool grove. While Kennedy gaped, the animal stole swiftly into the pool, drank sparingly, and returned and disappeared again behind the curtain of misty water cascading down the spring above. So that was it, as simple and as remarkable as that. The trail ran from behind the waterfall up the left-hand wall at the point opposite the right trail's sand, to terminate. But in the obvious, there was more than enough for a run and jump in the opposite safe landing, to and from either wall, with both takeoff and landing spots completely masked by the lower canyon. Gauging the distance of the jump, Kennedy knew he could make it, with his boots off and waist to his neck, or better, thrown over the colt in the saddle, and with the money. The Winchester being slung on his back, alone. He could make that distance in the air, but then, what of it? He made the jump safely and went out to the right side cliff trail, and Latino steer and gained the rim. Then what? He'd still be afoot in a hostile land in midsummer's blazing heat without food, water, or a mount. That was the rub. Even if he made that jump and the cliff beyond, he got to the rim, he would have to have a horse. Otherwise, the posse men, within an hour or two of dark, having come for him and found him gone, would climb back out and climb the main valley and search for the sign of his arms on both sides of the canyon, and they would still get him. It would get him easy. And them mounted and him on foot. Okay, I'm gonna have to pause because I have no more pauses for ads. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, well, we're back. Holy shit, I got a shiny fun baby. Baby! The fly baby is shiny. Ugh. Where's the story? Few more pages. They would get him easy, with them mounted and him afoot. No, he had to take that broomy stud horse with him. Somehow he had to get that Mustang to go with him up the cliff. If he could do that, if he could get a little horse to make him jump with him on its back, it would have to be that way, and he could never trust the brute to follow him, or to wait for him if he allowed it to jump first. If he could make that gap in the canyon, back a little wild horse, and then stay with him, headlanding him up the cliff trail, and then, my dear, would make it. He and the horse would make it together, just as he had promised to Runch the little devil. Up on the rim, he could remount the wiry Mustang, and together they would race away, and Kennedy would have his life, and the Broomtail stud would have his freedom, and the Gary's posse would have their ropes unstretched and their vengeance unadministered, and left to God where it belonged. The thought of the Almighty came very strong to Kennedy, and in that moment in desperate hope. He turned his face upward to peer out of the narrow slit of white twilight far below and far above him where the walls of the canyon seemed almost to touch at the top, and where far, far up there he could just now see the yellow steer climbing over the last few steps of the steep trail, and helping himself for the run and losing himself in the canyon's view. Kennedy nodded and said to the dusk-hushed stillness about him, "If you let me make it too, Lord, me and that little horse down yonder, Lord, the bank don't need it, and I don't want it any more after this night. I will give this money to the widow or that poor teller. I will figure out some way to do it. Lord, she don't know where it came from, and it'll turn loose this little wild hoss. If you will let me gentle him enough to get him and push him to the top over yonder, I'm going to try it, Lord. I'm going to go down there to that pool and try putting my loop around him. You reckon you could help me? I surely hope so, as I think you wouldn't send that Ladino steer down here to show a man a way out, and then not help him make it. Nor likewise do I think that you would put that little Mustang stud horse down here in that trap by the pool, unless you wanted him used. It looks to me, Lord, as if you truly wanted to pull me out of this here trap, and it's that way it is. Now thank you. I'll do my best." In the little light remaining, Kennedy went down from his rocks by the spring to try for the trapped wild horse. He took his rope from the trap gate and closed the gate. Instead, with brush and poles, hoping it would turn to the stud, though he could break past him when he came to the lariat. The actual catching went, as such things perversely will, with strange easiness. Or the little horse fought the loop when he felt it settle on him, but he did not do so viciously. The very fact that he permitted Kennedy to come close enough to tab the loop on him, to begin with, was particularly simple. It made the matter suspicious to Kennedy, and he thought the little stud was merely stalling on him, as an attempt to get him close where he could use his teeth and consume on him. He knew a small Mustang would do this. They would fight like panthers in close, using their teeth like carnivorous animals, and their feet with all the savagery of elk and moose fighting off wolves. But this was not the case with this tattered broomtail in the Mustang trap. When Kennedy got up near enough to him, he saw the reason why, or thought he did. The telltale white marks of a cinch in the saddle, the places where white hair had grown in to replace the original claybank sorrel hairs, clearly showed the darkening twilight. Kennedy's first thought was that this horse had been handled before it was now assured, and it would certainly explain the change of the animal the moment the man snubbed the loop tight around his neck, under the jaw, in a way that showed the horse he meant to hold him hard and ride, and to handle him again and had been handled years before. Memory is a strong force. The stud made Kennedy throw him on the ground, using a loose end of a rope, and make a figure-8 snake and rolled around his front legs to bring up the little pony down. But once he had been thrown and permitted to stand up again, it was all over. This man had gentled many horses, had spent his life with them, Her smell had become his smell. The very sound of his voice had a horse sound in it. The Mustang had heard it in the man's first words. He had a sense of kinship with this particular man, then he had sensed his mastery of horsekind now. He submitted to Kennedy and stood quiet, but still trembling, while the man stroked him and sweet whispered to him and got him to ease and stand without shaking, and without dread or apprehension. Then Kennedy cut and wove a makeshift brake and halter, the Plains Indian simple rope rein and bridle arrangement, continuing to talk all the while to the small Mustang. For half an hour more it was full dark, and the splitter of a Hacklemore bridle and the short reining rope was finished and put upon the horse. The animal was used to all practical purposes. It was a usable saddle horse. It was a piece of the greatest luck, Kennedy knew, that he had been able to catch and work a little brute, but it was not so entirely luck, as it had no sense of possibility to do it. His success made the fugitive believe that his hunch of higher help was a true one, and this thought in turn strengthened him and made his spirits rise. "Come on," he murmured to the little horse. "It's time we got out of here. Come on. Cooey, cooey. Yes. That's good. That's real good. Easy, easy." They went behind the creek falls, as the yellow Ladino steer had done. The Mustang pulled back a bit at the water, but once it had hit him, he steadied down and followed Kennedy's urging on the legs, as well as obediently as any horse would have done in similar straits. Behind the sheet of the falls, the left-hand trail went sharply up, but safely upward, and around the trunk-like bulge of the canyon's walls which had hidden from Kennedy's view in the spring. Around the turn was expected straight run and the leap over. This was better, even than Kennedy had hoped. There was actual soil in its track, and here and there some clumps of tough, rough grass was giving footing, power for the jump. "Steady now," said Kennedy, and eased up upon the crouching Mustang. The little mount flinched and deepened his crouch, but he did not break. Kennedy sighed gratefully and nodded upward to that power which clearly was helping him now. He took his grip of the rope rein and put the pressure on his bowed knees to the Mustang's ribs. Beneath him, he felt the little horse squat and gather himself. Then he touched him, just touched him, with the left boot heel. The wild stud uncoiled his tense muscles and shot down the runway of the trail and came up to the jump across as though he had been trained to do it since childhood. Kennedy felt his heart soar with the mighty upward spring of the small brute's wiry limbs. He laughed with sheer joy of it. He couldn't help it. He never had in his life felt a triumph such as this one. Sailing over that hell's pit of blackness down there beneath him, this gliding spirit, this arching, floating burst of power that was carrying him high above those deadly rock fangs so far below, and was carrying him too, up and away from those blood-hungry possimen and their winking, glaring, prying bull's-eye lanterns, which he could just see come now from an eye corner, coming into view of the down canyon in its deserted place at the spring above the pool and the peaceful grove of mountain ash and walnut and willow there at the head of the Rainbow Creek in Blunt Canyon, 60 or more miles from the Second National Bank and that pool of a dead tower in Gray's Landing, Montana. Oh, what wondrous, heady thing was life, and oh, what a beholden and humble man was Frank Kennedy for this gift, this chance, this answer to his fumbling prayer. He would never forget it. Never, never, never. They came down hard at the far end of the jump. The concussion of the horse hitting the ground rattled Kennedy's teeth and cracked his jaw together as loud as a pistol shot. He saw the lights behind his eyes and heard wild and strange sounds, but only for a second or two. Then all was clear again, and he and the little horse were going together up the right side of the cliff trail, Kennedy leading the way and the little horse following faithfully as a pet dog behind him. It seemed no more than a minute before they were where it had taken the yellow steer half an hour to climb, but it seemed only a breath later that they had topped over the rim and were free. Kennedy cried. The tears came down his face, and he could not help himself. He tried to think that little Mustang would care, though he was right. When he put his arm around the shaggy, warm neck and hugged the skinny old stud, the Mustang only whiskered deep with his throat and leaned into Frank Cassidy and rested his homely jug head over the man's shoulder. They were kind. They belonged to each other and were with each other, and that was true, for that was the way the Puzzlemen found them when they came probing carefully up the bed of the creek, to the deserted pool of the waterfall. The horse had fallen, with the man beneath him, and neither had known the flash or spark or hint of thoughts in the instant their lives had been crushed among the granite stags, and the creek bed below the jumping place of the Yule that he noticed here. Okay, so that means they did not make the jump. And that story was long. I'm not sure how long the next one is. The trap is 25 pages long. The next one is 16. Should I try it? Got 48 minutes left. Yeah, I'll do it. The White Riders by Glenn R. Burnham. I guess I'm the only living link of what actually happened to old Chola Davis, or what he thought happened. I only want to hear the details of his meeting with the White Riders. Of course, the main part about him and Bill Rickey being stranded out in the desert without water was more or less similar to most of the old-timers around that part of the country. Two of them had been across in Mexico and were returning over the old Diablo Trail when their luck ran out. That was long before my time, while Chola was still crawling up toward goaten age. The various people had kept the story alive. I heard it first from one of old Drag Eight Hands. It was this fellow and his partner. He found them on the far end of the sand flat. Rickery was dead, and Chola had certainly got to where he could look over into the other world, if such a thing was possible. What he saw there, however, was something else again. Somebody never else ever knew, not even me, until last night. I haven't done any talking either since that night. I was just a button at the time, and with natural reactions of a lone kid in a grown-up outfit, scared of being laughed at or accused of grazing the logo stems. Later years, the usual string of acquaintances offered me a little encouragement to sound off about such an off-center occurrence. So the story still stands, as old Chola finally unloaded it that night down in the Gila. But it's clear as if we were yesterday. I can still hear his low, thin voice and see him sitting across the campfire, flickering firelight, making phantom-like shadows across the caved-in cheeks, and his eyes holding on to whatever he was watching out in the empty darkness. I guess seeing and tell it had as much anything to do with it giving it reality, and that what happened shortly afterwards. I had known Chola for a couple of months. He had been lying riding down the rafter bar when I drifted down to the Squaw Valley, hooked up as an extra hand. Being a maverick kid and lonesome for any pat in the head made me natural for his easy friendliness and his habit of siding with me whenever things got a little scaly. Why, he took a liking to me, I'll never know. I just accepted it and rode on with him most of the time. We made a sort of odd pair. I was still a fuzzy sage and shabby old new colt, while he looked as old as the hills. I don't suppose he was actually over 45 or 50, with the tired old eyes under the shaggy wisp of snow-white hair, and skinny frame humped over like a laboring pack his scent carried 140 pounds, would have fit many of 70. The boys said he looked that way ever since his battle in the desert. However, I never gave much thought to his age. He was just old Chola, and the way he used the range and savvy into my thick skull without rawhiding my already badly bruised ego was all that counted in my book. This particular day, we had been out stray hunting in an ornery, upended stench of a country along Old Gila. Night found us camped down by the river, with our days gathering bedded down in the swale and angled back against the bluff. It had been a hard day. That sort of country was a tough position for anyone to take. Moreover, Chola's horse had taken a fall during the afternoon, shaking him up considerably. He had cracked his head against a rock and was looking pretty well faded by the time we made camp. He claimed that the hurt was wearing off, though a night's rest would straighten him out all right. I naturally let it go. Such mishaps are everyday stuff in our work. Still, as the evening wore on, I got the feeling of something queer about his actions. Just little things. You know how you'll usually spot any stray and off note in a close friend without being exactly able to put your finger on it? With him, it was a sort of fidgety restlessness instead of the usual quiet manner. There was an odd kind of far-off look in his eyes when he thought I wasn't noticing. He seemed eager to talk, which was never his way. He even went so far as to volunteer some of his early day experiences down along the border, a thing I had never known him to do before. It must have been crowding 9 o'clock when he broke off in the middle of a yarn about some Yaqui outlaws and some white settler's wife. I remember I was still humped over, shoving some greasewood chunks into the fire at the time. And suddenly, it was like the sudden silence was like someone had jerked a door shut between us. I could actually feel the quiet settle down like a heavy blanket, the way it does the head of a storm or just before a spooked herd breaks. A funny cold breath seemed to crawl up along my withers as I twisted around to see what had stopped it. Cholo was still propped up against the saddle, like he'd been for the past hour, but I saw at once he wasn't paying attention to me. His eyes were centered off in the darkness beyond camp. One side of his face was half turned to the firelight's jumpy glow, while his head was canted sideways, as if he were listening for something. Another chilly streak rippled in the direction of my shirt collar and started a question towards my lips. Chola, however, turned his face back that instant, and it was his question that sent me back on reeling my heels a second time. "I never told you about that time the desert rawhide and Bill Ricky and I, did I?" He asked, in the tone of a man wanting to unload something, and not quite knowing how to begin. I sat there staring out over my open mouth for a moment. I knew from experience how getting him to talk about that particular subject was like butting your head against a rock-eyed doorway. Now, I managed to choke back my surprise enough to blurt out, "No." He slowly twisted up a smoke, half turned once more to stare off into the night, while I dug for words that might help him get started. This was something I'd been wanting to hear for a long time, and my scattered wits were slowly closing in on the idea that this was my big chance. "That must have been one rough trip," I finally got out of my way of encouragement. "Lucky it didn't finish you like it did Ricky." "There was no luck about it." His sharp reply hauled me up short of my mouth, still hanging open. Then he went on slow and thoughtful, as though dragging memory up bit by bit to find the words. "No, luck had no hand in it. I wanted to go with Bill, begged him to take me, but they claimed my name wasn't on the books. I'll just have to bide my time, they said." "They?" I barked, jumping up like a shot-stung wolf. "Who are they? What do you mean?" "The White Riders." His voice had turned kind of low and toneless, with little pauses between the words. "That bunch that come for Ricky." And I saw his eyes swing around for another peek at whatever had been studying him out there in the darkness. I feel kind of hard to put into words. I only wish I could picture the whole setting as it was. Overhead, the big white, fire-bright stars blazed down in the purple-black sky, almost within reach as if lightning away for a half-high moon already climbing up over the ridge of the east. The old river at our feet seemed to be growling muffled answers to the breeze whispered off in the desert. Sounds of sleepy cattle bedded down in the swale added stealthily foot-like rustlings to the soft tinkle of our horse bells out in the darkness. And there, as a sort of centerpiece of it all, a little circle of campfire light flickered back and forth, throwing phantom shadows around Chola's gaunt body and mummy-like features. I was still trying to make my hat hold my short hair down when his eyes hollowed and face turned back in my direction, when his cigarette butt spun into the fire. I've never been your kind, and I've never found your mind exactly hidebound, he said, settling back into his position. Maybe it'll stretch over the seal. Most people couldn't savvy it. I don't myself entirely, but it was all there. It was something outside the range of luck. Chola slid down further against the saddle as he stretched over the first part of the story. He knew I'd heard about the main points of it. He just filled in some of the details about how Ricky decided to take the Chancy Diablo trail instead of going along the longer way around. Both were young and strong and good desert men. They never gave the idea of trouble any thought. And they would have likely made out all right if they hadn't run into a sandstorm that tied them up for 2 days at the middle of a hell-bound trench with sand and rock. The storm left them worn to whisper, with grub gone and canteens all but empty. One horse had pulled his picket pins and drift in the wind, while the other was half dead from thirst and breathing so much sand. There was nothing they could do but try to reach a doubtful waterhole they knew about. Waterholes were scarce as gamblers at a prayer meeting. They tried to take the remaining horse along, but the poor critter laid down for his last time a little past noon, just after they'd emptied their last canteen. It was just as well. Early the next day they'd found the waterhole full of sand, dry as a bone. I shoved a couple of chunks into the fire, slow and easy like with one foot, while he rambled along in a dreamy sort of way that sounded more like he was talking to himself about somebody nobody else could understand. I caught myself half holding my breath to hear better. That dry hole was a right sorry disappointment. That dry hole was a right sorry disappointment, Chola's voice went low. We'd already been 18 days without grub or out. We'd already been nigh on 18 hours without grub or water, and the heat had started our eyes playing tricks. We straightened up to face north in the deserts, where we knowed the Dragate Ranch ran down to some green hills on the border. It was a long ways. We didn't dare to think how far, but it was our only chance. Nobody needed to say nothing. We just hitched up our pants and struck out. My memory ain't right clear after that day. What with the heat and no water, we came unraveled pretty fast. I know we stopped to rest a couple of times. We sure needed it. The last time was just after sundown, but it seemed like we hadn't gotten bedded down when another brassy hot sun started prodding at us. After that, it's all a blur. Blazing sky and red-hot sand, and endless stretch of shoveling one hoof after another. I remember piling my gun and most of my clothes under grasswood sometimes, and I once started loping out cross country towards a pretty little creek all lined with waving green trees. Seemed I could even hear the water trickling over the rocks. But Bill snagged me and helped me down till the scenery came its normal self. Naked on the ground in red-hot sun and hot blue sky with nothing but heat and a pair of buzzards floating in between. Them buzzards bothered me the most, I remember. All I could think was they'd have all us hanged over sick and crippled critters on the range. I never mentioned that stuff to Bill, though. He was having trouble as 'twas I. Anyhow, my tongue got so big by the time that 'twas hard to talk. And all the while, that miserable sun kept pushing down on my skull till my head felt plumb flat. My legs got to where they felt like 2 dead sticks, and the hot sand fairly blistered my feet as I dragged them up and down and set them down. I'd throw my boots away sometimes, along. From time to time, we kept seeing other streams and ponds, and one in the lake looking for them that roared like an ocean. It took everything we had to keep each other from running ourselves ragged trying to reach them. In spite of known desert mirages, it was hard to believe. I don't reckon one man alone could have kept from sidewheeling off in all directions. I know it not took all the reason both of us had left to prevent the first one. The other of us was going haywire. But we did keep moving, somehow. I don't know 'twas a day and the next, or 2 days and nights and part of the third. It might have been longer for all I could say. There was a few dark spells, I remember, but they might have been some of the times I caved in. All the rest was hours and hours of blazing sun. It seemed like 10 years, but a man's mind and judgment get tolerable snarled at times like that. I couldn't rightly say just how long it was. Anyhow, the sun was near the horizon when I keeled over the last time. I thought it was evening. It might have been in my direction next. Bill tried to get me back on my feet, but he was gone himself too much. We were both on our knees, pawing at each other like a pair of drunks, when we tumbled over sideways and sprawled apart. Neither of us had any strength in us any further. My last recollection was hoping I didn't look much like a corpse, as Bill did, even though I felt I had looked like one. He was plumb sorry sight. His tongue was swollen half out of his mouth, and his cracked lips was all black with alkali and dry blood. His eyes looked like a pair of big red holes in an old skull, and I could see the shape of his ribs through the blistering white hide of where his shirt was gone. I turned my eyes away for a bit. It looked to me like the ground and the sun had tangled themselves in this mess of rainbow streaks shooting out of the black velvet curtain. I reckon I was plenty rocky myself. I seemed to be all one big burning misery. 'Twasn't long before them colored streaks petered out and the black curtains slapped down over everything. The next thing I knowed was coming all of a sudden. I felt like something had roused me. I distinctly recall rolling over and sitting up. It seemed as bright as day, though I can't remember seeing any sun, and the air was just as comfortable warmish. My burning had all faded out into a sort of tired laziness. Come Sunday, like a church morning after a big night in town. I could see the hills over where the Drag 8 lay, not more than 6 or 8 miles off, and the dry country stretching out in all other directions. Bill was already awake, sitting up from my left, and I noticed he was staring off somewhere towards the west, as if he was watching something. I must have been getting a couple minutes, getting my bearings. Everything was clear as you'd ever see it, and I was wide awake as I am now. And I heard it again, a noise that woke me up. I twisted round in the direction of Bill. Then I saw him. 10 or a dozen riders was headed our way at a stiff lope. They looked mighty pretty, far off as they were, bobbing against the skyline, and they were singing some kind of song. That was what woke me. I could never recall the words later, though they seemed plain enough then. Memory of it takes me back to 3 or 4 old range songs shuffled into some hymns to make a full deck. Sweet and moving as it was, though, all accompanied by soft low music that seemed to be coming from the jingling of their spurs and bed chains. As they come closer, I saw they were riding milk-white horses with white outfits to match. Saddles, chaps, clothes, all was the same color. Their bits and spurs looked like polished silver, and so was their stirrups and metal trimmings. Handsome has no name for it. And there's another odd thing. While I was watching them, I had no feeling of being scared or spooked up, like a man ordinarily would feel at such a sight of unusual outfit. Everything seemed plumb natural and according to oil. All I felt was some normal curiosity and a heap of pleasure in seeing such a sightly bunch. While they was still about 100 yards off, the party kind of fanned out, so I could see one of the boys in the center was leading an extra horse. It was all saddled and bridled, and roll of white clothes was tied up behind the cantle and white chaps across his burn. I remember the first thing that struck me was wondering if they hadn't brung too. It seemed plumb natural they should come for us. A minute later, they swung around in a half circle and pulled right up near the Bill was sitting. I half noticed the cool breeze blowing from their direction as they rode along. Now it seemed to be sort of sucked them around the whirlwind fashion. 20 rightly old, just cool and damp. Something like a man would feel standing in the mouth of a cave or under a wet sheet a whole day. As soon as they stop, the gent with the extra horse pulls along overside Bill. Maybe a dozen seconds he sits up and sizing things, then he steps up and gets Bill to his feet. A minute later, he begins helping him into the white outfit. I can see how Bill Trickle looked. Nobody paid attention to me. I started as long as I could, then let out a holler in their direction. I didn't hanker to be overlooked, but not one of them batted an eye my way, just like I didn't exist. I hollered and waved some more, same results. I tried to call Bill's attention by getting real personal. That didn't go down either. I was beginning to feel plumb hostile to them. I saw no call for them to be high-hatting me that way, just 'cause some Tony had an outfit picked them up. I was fairly hot-headed now, anyhow, them days. I finally started over to do something about it, and to let them know he couldn't get it shut out of me without an argument. But I didn't get very far. I was weak as a new calf in spite of feeling so good. I couldn't do much but weave and wobble when I did get to my feet. Still, I hadn't staggered more than just a few steps, for the boss of the outfit, or what I took to be the boss, looked my own way, kind of appraising-like. I heard the best I could, but hadn't covered more than half my length when he shook his head crosswise and motioned me back. I tried to ask him what had gained him company, and he kept coming. When I saw Bill step into the saddle and everybody started gathering up their reins, I got desperate and tried to run. I couldn't hack it. My feet wouldn't behave. About a second jump, my legs buckled sideways and my face plowed into the sand. Then I tried crawling without much better luck. I could just barely move. And then the bunch began reining around and setting themselves in their saddles. I saw they were set to pull out. I guess I took a fright and howling and begging not to be left there. My commotion finally caused the boss to turn back and look me over real long and careful. Then he shook his head some more and more, and spoke to me for the first time. I couldn't go this trip, he explained. There was nothing personal or uncomplimentary about it. It just had to be played according to the rules. When my card turned up, they'd be back after me. Meanwhile, I stayed on the ground. Well, I bawled and begged a lot more, but 'tweren't no good. With a wave of his hand, he swung back into the head of the outfit, and the whole bunch started moving off with Bill in the middle. A minute later, they was all headed back towards the west, loping along as a big white cloud of flying manes and tails bobbing riders. And they was singing that song again, just in the way I'd bust your heart. I just laid there, too miserable to lift my head, watching them get smaller and smaller, and their singing and dying out to a scant whisper. Cool breezes left with them, leaving it hotter again. I was hurting all over again, only worse. Felt like I was tight Dutch drum banked on the red-hot coals. Fire streaks began gouging up in my eyes and to the top of my head, and everything went black. The next thing I knowed, I was waking up in the Drag 8 bunkhouse, trying to suck water out of a medicine dropper and a plumb wreck. Alive was about all you could say for me. The boss told me a couple of his hands had noticed some circling buzzards and rode out to some flats to investigate. They found Bill stiff as a ramrod and me a little better. Said I was laying sprawled face down at the end of the string of tracks, where I'd staggered and crawled towards Bill's body. They claimed it looked like I'd been trying... Joel's voice trailed off in a sort of thin whisper. His head rocked sideways a trifle, then fell forward on his chest. Dead. Sure is dead, the coroner's verdict later. An instantaneous death from a blood clot on the brain. It was explained to everybody's satisfaction by the bump on his head where the horse threw him against the rock. But here's the part that still makes a good long look every time so often. But here's the part that still makes me take a good long look at myself every so often. I had been so bogged down in that chore had been telling that it took me a few minutes to shake myself awake back to reality. When I finally wrangled my wits into action and got around to the other side of the fire, he was sagged down against the saddle, one thumb hooked by his belt. Well, I stood there, wondering what to do. I heard a low humming noise in the air. It struck me, and then it hangs my memory, to the sound of singing in the distance. It had a sort of sweet melody. A moment later, I snapped up my jerk and bit rein and rattled suddenly close to me. It had been worn as a bit chain, and yet I turned around and nothing was there. About the same moment, a chill, dampish breeze set in across the river. It blew steadily for a bit, then swirled around me like a baby in a whirlwind and disappeared as suddenly as I'd come. I looked down again at Chova. As I straightened him on the saddle blanket, I couldn't help but notice his face had smoothed out. He actually looked years younger, with his lips relaxed like a baby asleep, sort of contented and smiling. And as the breeze sat down, my ears caught that low humming again, growing fainter as it faded in the distance. Okay. Everyone needs to hear about stories of ghost riders. Okay. Can we do one more? Where's the contents of it? That's half the book. We'll probably save the second half for next week. But anyway. It's about time anyway. Let's see who's on that we can raid. Or if anyone has a suggestion, you know what to do. Hope I can see chat again. Ouch! Where did my chat tab go? Okay. Let's see. Thursday. Harp round, I think. Nope, harp's on. Yeah. Why do you take so long, music? Come on. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Please pick whichever one applies to you. And hopefully I will see everyone tomorrow for some fairy tales. But in the meantime, let's raid before she gets caught up on her story again. See you after a while.